over there, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is Al24 News, streaming live from the capital Algiers, and coming up next in our news program. Russia's military forces blasted Ukraine's capital region and other major cities Wednesday as they tried to crush a Ukrainian defense that has frustrated their progress. Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky has said that peace talks with Russia were beginning to sound more realistic, but that more time was needed to ensure the outcome of the negotiations were in Kiev's interest. Ukraine has praised the courage of 3 European leaders who made a long, dangerous journey by rail from Poland to Kiev, and a show of support as the city came under further Russian attack. Hello there and welcome. Starting our news as usual with the latest updates over Ukraine-Russia conflict. US President Joe Biden plans to travel to Brussels next week to meet with the NATO allies about boosting support for Ukraine as it fights to resist of Russia's unprovoked attack. US President Joe Biden is reportedly set to announce an additional $800 million in aid for Ukraine, bringing the total amount of US aid to over $1 billion amid Ukraine's conflict with Russia. UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson traveled to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to discuss how the both Middle Eastern and oil and gas export and reduce purchases from Russia. The European Union on the Tuesday introduced a fourth round of anti-Russian sanctions. The new measures include bans on investments in the Russian energy sector and prohibitions on export of luxury goods and imports of iron and steel. About 29,000 people were evacuated from Ukrainian cities through humanitarian corridors, most from the besieged city of Mariupol, a senior Ukrainian official says. Challenge continues as the Russian military operation enters the third week. In the latest development, as a residential building in the Shevchikivsky district of Kiev partially collapsed and caught fire after multiple explosions rocked the Ukrainian capital early on Wednesday. The state emergency service said that 2 residential buildings were damaged in shelling overnight in the central part of Kiev. 2 people were injured, 35 were evacuated. Ukraine's President Vladimir Zelensky early on Wednesday said that peace talks with Russia were beginning to sound more realistic, but that more time were needed to ensure the outcome of negotiations were in Kiev interests.
It's difficult, but important, because every war ends with an agreement. The meetings continue. From what I have been told, the positions in the negotiations seem more realistic. However, more time is needed for decisions to be in Ukraine's interest. Citizens of Russia, all of you who have access to truthful information, can already understand how this war will end for your country. In shame and poverty, years of isolation, a very cruel repressive system that will treat the citizens of Russia in the same inhumane way that you, the occupier, have treated the Ukrainians.
A joint operation of the International Committee of the Red Cross and Ukrainian Red Cross is setting up 2 convoys of at least 18 buses leaving Sumy, and the United Nations said that 3 million people fled the country, with half of which are children.
Evacuation operations, humanitarian and medical aid are taking place as the Russian military operation continues. The International Committee of the Red Cross said that a few thousand civilians have left the besieged city of Sumy in a safe passage operation in buses heading to Lubny. As of humanitarian aid, 200 tons carried in 11 ICRC trucks arrived in Ukraine.
I work with the International Committee of the Red Cross. I'm currently in Ukraine in the city of Vinnytsia. I'm in a warehouse where we are currently offloading the content of 11 trucks, about 200 tons of humanitarian assistance that just arrived in the country.
The United Nations Children Fund says that almost every second that passes, a child in Ukraine becomes a refugee. as 3 million people have fled the country since February 24.
You do the maths, but it's 1.4 million children. Yeah, and that's over that. The last figures were 36 hours ago, so 1.4 million children over 18 days brings us at about 73,000. Bring that down, you get 55 children every minute. 55 children per minute.
9 out of 10 Ukrainians are expected to face poverty, according to UN Development Programme.
Polish, Czech Republic and Slovenian prime ministers met Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky in Kiev in the first visit by foreign leaders to the capital since the beginning of the Russian military operation in Ukraine. Zelensky described the prime ministers as fearless leaders.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky and his Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal met Polish, Czech and Slovenian prime ministers in Kiev. This is the first visit by foreign leaders to Kiev since the beginning of the Russian special operation on February 24.
Many ambassadors have left Ukraine because of the massive invasion of our country by the Russian Federation. These respected people, leaders of their great independent or European countries, are not afraid of anything. They are more afraid of our fate.
Polish Prime Minister urged the European Union to accept Ukraine's candidacy as soon as possible.
The European Union has to give very quickly a candidate status, and more than this, has to invite Ukraine to the European Union and all the defensive weapons to defend your homes.
In turn, Janez Janša, Prime Minister of Slovenia, affirmed that his country is doing everything possible to support Ukraine.
We are doing everything in our capacity to help you, to help the refugees coming from Ukraine. And we are totally aware that the most important thing is to help Ukraine with weapons.
For his part, Prime Minister of the Czech Republic describes Ukraine's struggle as a fight for freedom.
And you are fighting for your lives, for your families, for your country, for freedom. But we know you are fighting also for our lives and for our freedom.
The visit comes as Russian forces try to besiege the Ukrainian capital placed under curfew.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky has urged Canada to do more to protect his country from Russia in an address to a joint session of Canada's parliament. Zelensky said that the allies are expressing their deep concern, but it's not enough.
We're not asking for much. We're asking for justice, real support that will help us win and protect our lives, to protect lives around the world. Canada is already showing leadership, is doing already first, what other countries only do over time.
With our European Union partners, I can announce that we have imposed severe sanctions on 15 new Russian officials, including government and military elites who are complicit in this illegal war.
The group of 7 industrialized nations will hold an online meeting to discuss Russia's actions in Ukraine. Japanese Finance Minister Suzuki made a statement on Wednesday in Parliament, but not specify whether the meeting would be held among the G7's financial leaders or other representatives. The Russian military operation in Ukraine has drawn almost universal condemnation around the world, sent more than 1 million Ukrainians fleeing from that country, and triggered sweeping Western sanctions against Russia aimed at crippling its economy. Jens Stoltenberg, NATO Secretary General, said that NATO is set to tell its military commanders on Wednesday to draw up a plan for new ways to deter Russia following Moscow operation in Ukraine, including more troops and missile defense in Eastern Europe. Stoltenberg also stated that defense ministers from alliance will start an important discussion on concrete measures to reinforce their security for the longer term in all domains.
I think, if anything, it demonstrates the need to further strengthen integration, further strengthen information sharing among allies, and also to invest more and upgrade everything from radars to our presence of air and missile defense systems, and that's exactly what we do, also by deploying more Patriots in the eastern part of the alliance.
Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky declared that it must be recognized that Ukraine will not be able to join NATO. Why this fight is one of the reasons advanced by Russia to justify its military operation in the country.
Ukraine is not a member of NATO. We understand that. We are decent people. We have heard for years that the doors are open, but we have also heard that we cannot join. It is a truth, and it must be recognized. I'm happy that our people are starting to understand this and to rely on themselves and our partners who help us.
The nation of the Joint Expeditionary Force, a coalition of 10 northern European states, including Russia's Baltic neighbors, are meeting for a summit in London and listening to Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky via video call. At the summit, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson accused Putin of having seriously underestimated both Ukraine's resistance to invasion and the West's unity in the face of Russia's invasion of its pro-Western neighbor.
For some of the members of these peaceful cities,
our hearts, I think the hearts of the whole world, go out to the people of Ukraine in their appalling suffering. And we are, of course, doing a huge amount to help economically, politically, in terms of support for the hard-pressed Ukrainian defense forces. We're doing everything that we can at the moment to help. But I think we also recognize that we have to do more. And we're going to do more on all of those things. Nobody wants to be engaged in a direct military confrontation between the West and Russia. Clearly, that's not something that any of us want to see. But we recognize that it is our duty to support the Ukrainian people in their hour of need, and particularly to support the Ukrainian President, Vladimir Zelensky.
The Russian ambassador to the United Nations declared that Russia will propose its own project, which is humanitarian, adding that he regrets that France and Mexico have given up on submitting their proposal to vote to draft resolution on humanitarian aid in Ukraine. After 15 days of discussion, Vasily Nebenziadze asked for vote directly in the General Assembly of the United Nations, where Russia has no right to vote.
As you know, France and Mexico came with a humanitarian resolution on the situation in Ukraine. It has been already more than a week that they introduced the initial draft. And we said from the very beginning that we would be prepared to adopt a humanitarian resolution on the situation in Ukraine, provided that this is not a disguise to blame and shame Russia again. We learned that the French and Mexican ambassadors came to you and announced that instead of the Security Council, they will move this resolution to the General Assembly, which is not standard practice, as you all know, but they were citing the inability to adopt this resolution in the Council because of Russia. As I said, we made it clear that we would be prepared to adopt a humanitarian resolution. We will put forward our own draft, which is humanitarian, and we will put it into the blue shortly, and we'll see whether the Security Council can or cannot fulfill its mission to adopt a resolution which will be on the humanitarian situation in Ukraine with clear humanitarian provision like call for negotiated ceasefire, evacuation of civilians, respect of international humanitarian and human rights law, condemnation of attacks against civilians and civilian objects, safe and unhindered passage, unhindered access of humanitarian assistance, etc.
A Russian editor who protested against Moscow's military operation in Ukraine during a prime-time news broadcast on a state TV was released from custody Tuesday and penalized with $270. Marina Okanyusikova, an editor at Channel 1 Television, interrupted a live program and charged onto the studio holding a poster reading "No War" in English. Two journalists working for Fox News have been killed outside of Kiev amid the Russian military operation in Ukraine after the news network said that the vehicle was struck by incoming fire. Cameraman Pierre Zakharewski and producer Oleksandra Kushanyova were killed when they were traveling in a vehicle in Huranka, nearly 20 miles from Ukraine's capital, Kiev. Pierre was a war zone photographer who covered nearly every international story for Fox News, from Iraq to Afghanistan to Syria, during his long tenure with Fox News. China's government on Wednesday described Taiwan's humanitarian aid for Ukraine and sanctions on Russia as taking advantage of the other's difficulties after the island announced it was sending more funds donated by the public of refugees. Taiwan's government says that it has a duty to stand with other republics. In an economic summit organized by the German newspaper Die Welt in Berlin, the German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said that the West continues to trust in the effect of sanctions imposed on Russia. Together with our allies in Europe and the US, we have prepared very precise sanctions. Olaf Scholz added that Russian President Vladimir Putin may have planned this war for a year and prepared for economic reactions from the international community, but he underestimates our determination. The sanctions are having a strong impact that Russia ever have imagined. US President Joe Biden signed a $1.5 trillion budget package for 2022 at the White House. The legislation provides $13.6 billion in supplemental funding to boost humanitarian security and economic assistance related to Ukraine conflict. Nabil Khazini.
Following a series of sanctions against Moscow that aim to hamper the Russian economy, US President Joe Biden will send $13.6 billion in aid to Ukraine. This was when Joe Biden signed the $1.5 trillion budget package for 2022.
This bill also includes historic funding, $13.6 billion, to address Russia's invasion of Ukraine and the impact on surrounding countries.
The money will go both to helping Ukrainian refugees fleeing their country, and the bill also fits into a broader US efforts to bolster Ukrainian defense.
And we're also facilitating significant shipments of security assistance from our allied partners to Ukraine. With this new security funding and the drawdown authorities in this bill, we're moving urgently to further augment the support to the brave people of Ukraine.
Joe Biden signed the bill shortly after the White House announced he would travel to Brussels this month for an extraordinary summit about the situation in Ukraine.
He will also join a scheduled European Council summit to discuss our shared concerns about Ukraine, including transatlantic efforts to impose economic costs on Russia, provide humanitarian support to those affected by the violence, and address other challenges related to the conflict.
For his part, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky will deliver a significant address today to the US Congress, which recently passed a $13.6 billion emergency package to supply defensive, humanitarian, and economic aid to Ukraine. Zelensky is expected to call for the US to help enforce a no-fly zone in Ukraine, something the Ukrainian president has repeatedly asked for, but was faced with rejection.
As deadlines approach for payment on Russian sovereign debt, as the loss of the access to much of its foreign currency reserves leaves the government with few options. According to the Bank of Russia's estimate, external debt of the Russian Federation totaled $478.2 billion, having increased by $11 billion since the beginning of the year. Russia has more than $100 million in coupon payment on dollar dominated by debt coming due Wednesday, with a 30-day grace period, with principal payments totaling $300 million and $2 billion are due March 31st and April 4th. In France, the oil depots of two cities of Lorient and Brest were blocked on Tuesday by transporters, farmers and fishermen to denounce the rise in fuel prices. About 200 people, including 100 fishermen, were present on the site and about 40 vehicles were parked near the yard, preventing the trucks from leaving.
Some companies consume 5,000 liters of fuel per day. With this price, the 15 cents, it is ridiculous. The efforts can be greater and must be greater, and we want visibility. For us, it is important to know where we are going, how we do to cost. Currently, all the projects that have been costed, which are carried out, have been costed in October, November, December, and with the prices we currently have for fuel, we are losing money. We can't pass it on 100% to our customers. It's not possible.
North Korea launched a suspected missile that appeared to explode shortly after a liftoff in the skies over Pyongyang on Wednesday. South Korea's military said that amid reports that the nuclear-armed North was seeking to test fire its largest missile yet, the United States and South Korea have warned that North Korea may be preparing to launch an intercontinental ballistic missile at full range for the first time since 2017. In a violation of the United Nations Security Council resolutions. President Pedro Castillo, before the Congress of the Republic, delivered a message that lasted more than 1 hour. He notably specified that the administration would send a series of legislative reforms to overcome the current crisis in the country.
I'm not here to invent anything. During these months, the country has witnessed an escalation of tensions and confrontations. I must recognize the errors and mistakes that we have made. I express the Parliament and the country my spirit of amendment and correction. Accepting the mistake of my government does not imply under any circumstances accepting my participation in the alleged criminal acts that the public ministry has been investigating.
And now more international news in this roundup by Zahra Furjani.
New Zealand will reopen its borders ahead of schedule, thanks to the country's anti-COVID policy, which has made it a safe place to visit, says the Prime Minister.
Today I'm announcing the next stage in our border reopening work. Our border has already reopened to New Zealanders from around the world. And on Monday, critical and skilled workers also became eligible to enter without isolation to shore up our workforces in industries such as agriculture, technology and construction as our economy rebounds. And we have now received guidance that it is safe to significantly bring forward the next stage of border reopening work.
Hundreds of motorcycle enthusiasts filled Jakarta's main street as MotoGP riders joined a short parade through the Indonesian capital after meeting President Joko Widodo.
Like I told you before, I couldn't ride my bike to join the parade because I was not allowed to for security reasons. I was a bit disappointed. There are 122 million motorbikes in Indonesia. I told the MotoGP riders that this is why their fans here are huge. They all were happy to hear that.
South Korea reports more than 400,000 new cases of coronavirus on Wednesday, a new record for the country.
As the number of cases increases exponentially, I'm starting to worry. I don't think the vaccines are working properly. I think everyone will eventually get infected, and we will achieve herd immunity.
China was scrambling to free up hospital beds on Wednesday to save hospitals from being potentially overwhelmed by an outbreak of Omicron cases that has already locked down tens of millions of people.
Sport now and Champions League nights. The striker Darwin Núñez headed home a 77th minute winner as Benfica seized a shock 1-0 victory away at Ajax Amsterdam on Tuesday to secure a surprise Champions League quarter-final place. Benfica's veteran central back pair of Vertonghen and Nicolas Otamendi were a defensively wall that Ajax were unable to break down, despite dominating the possession and constantly attacking the visitors' goal. On the other game, Manchester United crashes out after a defeat to Atletico Madrid. United went out of the Champions League having been undone, as so many have been, by the greater smartness and drive of Atletico Madrid. Renan Lodi's 41st minutes goal was the difference in 1-0 win at Old Trafford, which carried the Spanish side through to the quarter-finals on 2-1 aggregate victory to join Bayern Munich, Liverpool, Manchester City and Real Madrid, as well as Benfica among the final 8 teams in the competition. Manchester United interim manager Ralf Rangnick could not hide his frustration after the defeat to Atletico Madrid, saying, "We started the game exactly the way that we wanted to play, energetically, but unfortunately we were not able to convert that energy." As well as the goalkeeper David De Gea said, "I am very disappointed and I apologize to the fans."
But unfortunately, we couldn't convert that energy into 1 or 2 goals. We hit the crossbar. We had another 1 or 2 good moments where we could have scored or should have scored, but we didn't. And then conceding that one counter-attacking goal short before halftime didn't make life any easier for us. And in the second half, it was difficult. I think
They were really disappointed with the result. Well, it's difficult to describe with words how we feel now at the moment, but I think we did not enough in both games to win both games. We were not at our best, to be honest, but yeah, it's a very disappointed day for us.
You threw everything at them. You were even up front in the last moments. It was a night of tension. United didn't quite get going, did they?
I think they are a team with a lot of experience. They know how to play those games, Champions League games, tight games. They scored the goal, and it's a very defensive team, so it was very difficult for us to create chances. We don't create many chances, so this is football. This is Champions League, and we are out of one of the most important competitions, and so we are really, really sad.
Fortunately, since Alex Ferguson left Manchester, there is no Manchester no more. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us. Take care of yourself, and bye-bye.